Usually when we talk about planning a life or building a career or even just plotting out a new creative project, there's this immense, almost subconscious expectation of pristine design.
Yeah, like everything is just supposed to fit perfectly.
Right. Think about architecture. You look at a scale model of a building in a studio, and it is, it's entirely flawless. The lines are sharp, the glass is perfectly transparent.
Little plastic trees are exactly where they should be.
Exactly. And the lighting is totally controlled. And the architect can just point at it, completely insulated from the elements, and say, well, there it is. That's the plan.
Because it's entirely clean.
Yeah.
And, more importantly, it is completely theoretical. The model obeys the architect because it basically lacks the capacity for friction.
It's just safe.
Yeah, everything exists in the state of perfect, uninterrupted proportion.
Which is incredibly comforting. We desperately love things to be theoretical because theory doesn't push back. But then, you inevitably have to step out of the studio and walk onto the actual construction site.
And suddenly, that pristine, obedient model is just gone.
Gone. You are standing ankle-deep in mud. The steel is 3 weeks late. The weather is unpredictable and, honestly, awful.
Right. The crew is exhausted.
Yeah, the foundational measurements you relied on are slightly off, and the landscape is just completely chaotic. You're looking at a reality that is deeply, unavoidably messy.
You've moved from the safety of the model to the absolute burden of the build. And that transition, that is the definition of unavoidable abrasion. You can't construct anything in the real world without getting scratched.
And that profound transition, from the clean theory of how life should look to the muddy, abrasive reality of how life actually is, that's exactly what we're exploring today. So welcome to this deep dive.
It's an important one.
It really is. Our mission today is a serious one. We are not doing like a quick hit of motivational fluff. We're not doing hustle culture bravery or giving you a top 10 list of morning life hacks.
Thank goodness for that.
Right. We are doing a profound nonfiction meditation on courage, criticism, responsibility, and what it genuinely means to live a life of consequence. And to do this, we're pulling from a massive stack of sources.
We really are covering a lot of ground today.
We're starting with the foundational historical artifact, Theodore Roosevelt. Then we're going to look at why we secretly run from the mud, pulling from existential psychologist Rollo May.
Which is fascinating stuff.
Totally. From there, we'll look at the daily architecture of endurance with military commanders William H. McRaven and Jocko Willink. And we're dragging this into the modern corporate world with Ben Horowitz.
And finally looking at long-term greatness with Jim Collins.
Exactly. It's a massive progression of thought. But to ground the entire analysis, we have to start with that historical artifact. April 23rd, 1910, the Sorbonne in Paris.
Right. Theodore Roosevelt is delivering a speech. He's a former president at this point, but definitely not former in the sense of being a quiet, retired elder statesman.
He wasn't exactly a guy looking to kick back, write some memoirs, and play golf, right?
Right. Far from it. He had left office the previous year, plunged immediately into this incredibly grueling, dangerous African expedition, and arrived in Europe still possessing this massive, almost overwhelming appetite for action.
Action, judgment, consequence. He just thrived on it.
He really did. And the specific context of this speech is critical. The actual title of the address was Citizenship in a Republic. He was not delivering a self-help seminar on, personal ambition or how to get rich.
Right. It was much bigger than that.
He was actively attacking the softness of the intellectual elite of his day. He was looking at a society that was becoming increasingly comfortable, and he was deeply concerned about a republic dissolving into vanity and passivity.
Okay, let's unpack this.
Yeah.
Because to really understand the gravity of this deep dive, you, the listener, need to hear the actual foundation. Not just the heavily edited soundbite you see on, like, a motivational poster.
Or a shoe commercial.
Exactly. You need the entire unabridged paragraph. So I'm going to read it right now, exactly as Roosevelt delivered it to that crowd in Paris. Quote, "It is not the critic who counts, not the man who points out how the strong man stumbles or where the doer of deeds could have done them better."
Which is such a powerful opening.
It really sets the tone. He continues, "The credit belongs to the man who is actually in the arena, whose face is marred by dust and sweat and blood, who strives valiantly, who errs, who comes short again and again."
Because there's no effort without error.
Right. He literally says, because there is no effort without error and shortcoming. But who does actually strive to do the deeds? Who knows great enthusiasms or the great devotions? Who spends himself in a worthy cause?
He really builds the momentum there.
And then the finish. Who at the best knows in the end the triumph of high achievement, and who at the worst, if he fails, at least fails while daring greatly, so that his place shall never be with those cold and timid souls who neither know victory nor defeat.
It's just, it remains a stunning piece of public language. And what's most remarkable when you really listen to the text is that Roosevelt flatters almost no one.
No.
Yeah.
He isn't selling a fantasy at all. He doesn't say, hey, step into the arena and you'll be glorious, victorious, and universally loved. He's literally promising dust, sweat, and blood.
He insists on failure. He explicitly says you will come short again and again. He refuses to grant the person in the arena the narcotic of perfection.
Oh, I like that phrase, the narcotic of perfection.
What he grants them instead is dignity. And that dignity is derived entirely from accepting the conditions under which your flaws become visible. But while Roosevelt provides this incredible, towering moral frame, he leaves some massive practical questions open.
Yeah. He really does.
He defines the arena beautifully, but he doesn't explain why it's so psychologically terrifying to enter it. He doesn't explain how a person survives the crushing daily weight of it without just collapsing.
And he doesn't map out what the arena looks like in modern distributed institutional life, which is exactly our mission for you today. We're going to answer those open questions.
But we have to start where Roosevelt starts, with the very first sentence of the quote. It is not the critic who counts.
Out of all the soaring things he could say about bravery and courage, why is his opening move a direct attack on the person sitting in the stands?
Because the critic is always nearby. And, more profoundly, the critic represents a permanent, seductive moral possibility inside every single one of us.
Oh, wow.
We tend to visualize the critic as an external nuisance, right? Like an anonymous troll on the internet, a hostile colleague, a cynical reviewer. But Roosevelt is warning us about the deep internal temptation to become the critic ourselves.
I have to push back on this a little bit, though. Let's play devil's advocate. Isn't criticism fundamentally essential for a healthy society? I mean, we need whistleblowers. We need product reviewers so we don't buy garbage. We need journalists to point out when a politician is lying or a corporation is dumping toxins. It can't all just be blind, unquestioned action, right?
That is a vital distinction, and Roosevelt understood it. Criticism in the service of truth has genuine uses. It corrects, it warns, it exposes corruption, it punctures vanity. A mature culture requires rigorous evaluation.
Okay, so where does it go wrong?
The specific danger Roosevelt is targeting is when criticism becomes a substitute for living.
A substitute for living. That's heavy.
Yes. The critic, in the tragic sense Roosevelt is attacking, lives beside consequence. The doer, the person in the arena, lives under consequence. Let's look at the mechanics of how the critic operates. They rely almost entirely on what we can call retrospective superiority.
Retrospective superiority.
Right.
So basically, Monday morning quarterbacking elevated to a lifestyle.
Exactly. The critic waits. That is their defining action. They wait until the speech is given and the crowd reacts poorly. They wait until the startup goes bankrupt.
Or until the leader makes a controversial decision and the fallout occurs.
Right. They wait until a marriage gets difficult. And then, from the absolute safety of the stands, they deploy the benefit of hindsight to appear intellectually and morally intact. They say, well, obviously they should have pivoted the product line, or I saw that cultural failure coming a mile away.
Because they have the outcome. It's such a rigged game. The doer didn't have the outcome when they had to make the agonizing choice. The doer was operating with incomplete information, facing the actual abrasion of reality, guessing, hoping, just trying to hold things together.
Right.
And the critic gets to act like they had the answers all along, which makes them look incredibly smart without having to risk a single thing.
What's fascinating here is the fundamental difference between rightness and burden. The critic might be 100% technically correct. They might point out a genuine, undeniable flaw in the strategy.
They might accurately identify a bad hire.
Exactly. Roosevelt never claims the critic is factually wrong, but his argument is that even if the critic is perfectly, unassailably correct, they are still fundamentally less serious than the flawed person who actually took on the burden of the decision.
Rightness versus burden. You can be factually right from the stands, sitting there with your clean hands and your perfectly ironed shirt, but you aren't carrying anything. You aren't bleeding. You aren't losing sleep. Your face isn't marred.
Action isn't just about good intentions. It is about abrasion. Real work abrades you. Real love abrades you. Genuine leadership abrades you. If you bind yourself to consequence, you're going to get scratched up and your limitations will be exposed.
Oh, true.
And the deepest, most intoxicating appeal of the critic is that they remain clean, they are insulated, and that cleanliness is incredibly seductive because it masquerades as integrity.
Oh, it looks like they're just maintaining exceptionally high standards. You hear this all the time. Oh, I didn't launch my creative project because the market conditions aren't perfect yet.
Right. I didn't commit to that relationship because my partner has these 3 minor flaws that I just can't accept.
I didn't take that leadership role because the company culture isn't pure enough for my values. It sounds so highly principled, you know.
It sounds principled, but it is often just a highly refined form of cowardice and insulation. And if we look at modern life, this dynamic has been hyper-magnified to a degree Roosevelt couldn't have imagined.
Oh, without a doubt.
Think about our digital landscape. Social media, the instant commentary cycle, the friction of communication dropping to zero. We've engineered a society where spectatorship is the default mode of existence.
Frictionless spectatorship. You don't even have to leave your couch. You just type a devastating takedown and hit send.
And because commentary is so extraordinarily cheap and immediate, people build entire identities around appraising the courage and the failures of others while remaining entirely insulated from risk themselves.
It's like becoming a professional connoisseur of responsibility without ever actually being responsible for a single human being or a single tangible outcome. The culture invites you to pronounce judgment before you've built anything.
Which brings us to what I think is the most devastating, haunting line in Roosevelt's entire speech. He delivers this ultimate judgment. He says the ultimate tragedy is to end up with those cold and timid souls who neither know victory nor defeat.
Yeah, it's not failure he pities. The lowest possible condition you can achieve in this life isn't losing. It is arranging your life so carefully, so perfectly, that you never actually face minuan stakes.
A soul becomes cold when it prefers observation to participation for too long. It becomes timid, not because it fears physical danger, but because it fears existential exposure.
Right. You can be a very articulate, opinionated, passionate person on the internet or at a dinner party and seem very much alive. But if you have architected your life to avoid being tested, you've withdrawn from the only conditions where human dignity is actually forged.
Precise.
So this creates a massive tension. If we know this, if Roosevelt has given us this undeniable moral hierarchy, where the sweaty, bleeding, failing person in the dirt is the honorable one, and the clean, smug, brilliant critic in the stands is the tragic figure, why do so many of us still naturally retreat to the stands?
That's the million-dollar question.
Because we do. I do it. Everyone listening to this does it in some area of their life. What is the invisible force that's keeping us out of the arena, even when we know it's where we belong?
To answer that, we have to transition from the historical civic perspective of Roosevelt into the raw, internal, psychological reality of the individual. And our sources turn to Rollo May, a brilliant existential psychologist.
Okay, existential psychology.
Right.
So we're getting into the heavy machinery of the human mind here, meaning choice, freedom.
Yeah. May spent his career studying anxiety, creativity, and the deeply painful process of becoming a self. May believed humans aren't just collections of habits and reflexes. We are creatures forced to choose under conditions of massive uncertainty.
Which is terrifying.
It is, and May provides a definition of courage that completely shatters how modern culture usually frames it. He wrote, quote, "Courage is not the absence of despair. It is rather the capacity to move ahead in spite of despair."
I want to pause and just hover over that for a second.
Mm-hmm.
Because society constantly treats courage like it's a superpower mood. Like you drink a magical green juice or you listen to a really intense hype playlist and you put on this emotional armor where you feel totally invincible.
Yeah, that's a theatrical, childish misunderstanding of human psychology. May strips all of that away. Courage is not a mood of brightness. It's not a clean, confident feeling where the clouds part, you see your path perfectly, and you feel totally equal to the task.
He says that true courage has despair right at its center. But what's the actual difference between fear and despair here? Because in casual conversation, people use those words completely interchangeably.
It's a vital architectural distinction. Fear threatens your survival or your comfort. Fear says, if I do this, something bad might happen. I might lose my investment. I might get fired. People might laugh at me.
Right.
Despair operates on a much deeper frequency. Despair threatens your meaning. Despair says, Even if I go through all of this pain, nothing worthwhile will come of it. Even if I try my absolute hardest, I might expose myself only to find out that I am fundamentally limited.
Wow. So fear is, I might fail.
Hmm.
Despair is, my failure will prove that I'm a fraud, and all this suffering was completely pointless.
Exactly. People don't stay on the sidelines just because they are physical cowards. They stay on the sidelines because stepping into the arena requires them to wager their very identity.
That is so true.
They are terrified that the suffering the arena guarantees won't produce the meaning they hoped for. Despair is the dark temptation to conclude, before you even start, that the exposure isn't worth the cost. Therefore, to move ahead in spite of despair means you're acting without any emotional guarantee that your action will be justified.
You don't get the inward settlement. You don't get the warm, glowing feeling of everything's going to be okay. You just have to step into the mud anyway, completely hollowed out by the possibility that it might all be for nothing.
And May takes this a step further with a realization that is incredibly defining for our current culture. He points out that the opposite of courage in our society is not cowardice. The opposite of courage is conformity.
Conformity. Just blending into the background.
Yeah.
Doing exactly what everyone else is doing so no one looks at you.
Because conformity is so profoundly merciful in the short term, the arena makes you singular. When you step into it, your specific name is attached to the work, to the decision, to the failure. That singularity is deeply isolating.
And conformity protects you from that isolation.
Exactly. You just parrot what the group approves of. You speak within acceptable pre-approved margins. You chase ambitions that, even if you fail at them, won't get you kicked out of the tribe because everyone else is chasing them too.
It's social camouflage. It allows you to feel morally warm and cozy inside the group, while secretly, completely evacuating the courage needed to stand at risk of disapproval. You choose to be comfortably unreal instead of visibly answerable.
And think about how punitive modern society is regarding visibility. To create something, to publish a thought, to lead a local initiative, to speak plainly, you're entering a public field where the crowd evaluates you infinitely faster than you can adapt or grow.
The penalty for making an honest error in public feels disproportionately massive, almost fatal socially.
Conformity looks like absolute sanity under those conditions. The crowd is ready to judge you before you're even ready to be fully seen.
Which perfectly explains why May's concept of creative courage is so uniquely agonizing. He says creative courage is the act of discovering new forms, new symbols, new ways of doing things. It's agonizing because you're presenting something unfinished.
Right, you don't have the data or the precedent to prove that it works yet. The creator, whether that's an artist painting a canvas, a startup founder trying a new business model, or even a parent trying a new way to connect with a difficult child, is putting something into public space without the legitimacy of precedent.
They're early, and early things are inherently unavoidably fragile.
It highlights how humiliating human growth actually is. We avoid the arena because we secretly suspect that our ideals, our talents, our capacities are fragile.
We'd rather sit in the stands and preserve the pristine fantasy of our noble hypothetical self, this perfect version of us that exists only in our heads, than step into the arena and meet our limited, fumbling, real self.
That is the core psychological barrier May illuminates. The arena doesn't just contain physical or financial risk. It contains revelation. It reveals your mixed motives, your hidden vanities, your dependencies, your lack of skill.
People don't avoid the arena because they hate greatness. They avoid it because they deeply suspect that striving will introduce them to an ordinary, wounded self they don't want to meet. They use conformity to hide from their own reality.
Exactly.
Okay, so we have this setup. We know from Roosevelt that the arena is where dignity lives. We know from Rollo May that our own internal despair and our desperate desire to conform are the psychological forces keeping us trapped in the stands. But let's say you push through that. You make the choice. You decide, I'm going in, I'm taking the risk. Once you're in, how do you keep from being immediately crushed by the pressure of it?
Because knowing what courage is conceptually isn't enough to survive a Tuesday afternoon when everything is falling apart.
Exactly. We need an actual framework.
And to find that framework, we have to pivot away from the philosophical realm of existential psychology and step into the incredibly harsh, practical realm of conduct. We turn to two military voices, specifically from the U.S. Navy Special Operations community.
Admiral William H. McRaven and former Navy SEAL Commander Jocko Willink.
Right. Now, these are guys who do not spend a lot of time analyzing their childhood trauma or pondering existential dread. They deal with life and death, extreme physical and mental strain, and chaotic environments.
And McRaven has this incredibly famous piece of advice that almost everyone has heard by now. He says, if you want to change the world, start off by making your bed. I have to play devil's advocate here.
Go for it.
Our listeners are smart. They've heard the make your bed speech. And honestly, how in the world does tucking in my sheets prepare me for the dust, sweat, and blood of Roosevelt's arena? I hear that, and it sounds like a cute productivity hack for a morning routine vlog.
It does sound cliché on the surface.
It sounds totally cliché. How does a neat bed help me survive existential despair?
If we connect this to the bigger picture, it is crucial to understand that McRaven is not delivering a sermon about neatness or interior decorating. He's establishing an anthropology of endurance, structure over mood.
Okay, structure over mood.
His point is that you do not magically rise to the demands of the arena by becoming incredibly noble on command when a crisis hits. You meet immense demands with the tiny habits you practiced in the hours when absolutely no one was watching and no one was praising you.
Okay, so the bed is just a proxy, the stand-in for baseline discipline.
It's the first rep of the day. He is stating that if you cannot hold yourself to a standard in the quiet, mundane moments, you will completely disintegrate when it matters. The quiet moment is where self-government is constructed. Think about how most of us live. We're constantly negotiating with ourselves.
Oh, the internal bargaining. It is constant. I'm tired. I'll send that difficult email tomorrow. It's not that big of a deal if I skip this workout. Nobody will notice if I cut this one corner on the project.
We're basically lawyers arguing against our own potential.
Yes.
Weakness enters our lives as an argument. We bargain with fatigue, we bargain with duty, we bargain with discomfort. What rigorous discipline does is systematically reduce that negotiation space. Habits remove the bargaining.
That's a great way to put it.
The truly disciplined person isn't necessarily physically stronger or inherently braver than anyone else. They have simply engineered a life where they prevent themselves from turning every single daily obligation into a referendum on their current mood.
That is incredibly profound. Weakness enters as an argument. If you have a rule that you make your bed every day, you aren't standing there at 6 a.m. arguing with yourself about it. You just do it.
Exactly.
And that automated standard translates directly to when the stakes are terrifyingly high. You aren't arguing with yourself about whether to tell the truth to a client or whether to take accountability for a massive failure. You just do it because the standard is automated.
And McRaven pairs this internal automation with a vital external expectation. He mandates that you must expect unfairness, and you must expect to fail often, regardless of your effort. He illustrates this with the concept from SEAL training known as the sugar cookie.
The sugar cookie. Explain the mechanics of that, because it sounds sweet, but in context, it's brutal.
In SEAL training, there are uniform inspections, and sometimes, no matter how flawlessly you press your uniform, no matter how much you shine your boots, the instructors will arbitrarily decide that you failed.
Just totally random.
Completely random. Your punishment is to run fully clothed into the freezing Pacific surf, roll around in the dry sand on the beach until every part of you is coated, and then spend the rest of the day cold, wet, and chafing. You are a sugar cookie, and it happens for absolutely no reason other than to prove that life is fundamentally not fair.
Which completely destroys the ego of the high achiever.
Yeah.
Because high achievers believe in a direct correlation between effort and reward.
It shatters it intentionally. A lot of people's drive and independence is actually disguised pride. They think, if I do all the right things, the world owes me fairness. The world owes me success.
Wow.
McRaven is warning us that if you enter the arena expecting fairness, you are walking around with psychological explosives strapped to your chest. The moment life is arbitrary and unfair, which it will be, you detonate. You become a victim, you quit.
So the people who survive the arena are defined by how they absorb the unfairness. They don't complain. They don't blame fate. They stand tall, they accept the sand and the cold, and they drive on.
Exactly. So McRaven gives us this habitual institutional armor. Then we bring in Jocko Willink, and his angle is even more prosecutorial. Willink says, point-blank discipline is infinitely more important than motivation. He views motivation as essentially useless.
Willink's philosophy strips away layers of modern self-deception. We live in a culture that absolutely worships motivation. We think we have to feel inspired or aligned or passionate before we do the hard thing. We sit around waiting for this perfect emotional weather to arrive.
But human feeling is inherently unstable. Obligation remains constant. If you allow motivation to govern your life, your seriousness will vanish the second your emotions recede.
Which links right back to Rollo May and despair. If you wait until you don't feel despair, you will never take the risk. Willink is saying, I don't care if you feel despair or exhausted or completely uninspired, the obligation hasn't changed.
Your motivation is the weather. Your discipline is the house that withstands the weather.
And Willink has a very specific, almost jarring response to adversity that highlights this. When a severe setback happens, when a mission fails, when funding gets pulled, when you get injured, his immediate vocal response is one word, good.
Yeah, that's his trademark.
Okay, we have to deconstruct this because I know a lot of people hear the Jocko Good audio and it sounds exactly like toxic positivity, like, oh, my business just burned to the ground and I lost my life savings. Good. It sounds forced, almost psychotic. How is this not just delusional optimism?
It's crucial not to misinterpret the mechanism of what he's doing. It is not an invitation to enjoy pain, and it's certainly not blind optimism. It is a highly aggressive theory of interpretation.
Okay, interpretation.
Willink understands that setbacks wound you twice. First, they wound you materially, you lost the money, you broke your leg, the competitor beat you. But second, and far more dangerously, they wound you narratively. They tempt you to tell a fatalistic story about yourself.
Right. I lost the money, therefore I'm a terrible business person and I should never try again. I broke my leg, therefore the universe hates me. The narrative wound is the one that actually stops you from re-entering the arena.
Surrender always begins in language. By the time you physically quit, you've already spent days or weeks granting the setback the power to completely define your identity in your own mind. When Willink says good, it's a radical, immediate refusal to grant pain sovereignty over your meaning.
It means good, now I have a new set of parameters. Good, now I know exactly what doesn't work. Good, now I have an opportunity to practice resilience. It's asserting interpretation before surrender becomes action.
It aggressively reclaims the locus of control before the victim mindset can take root. And Willink also warns about how we usually lose that control. He points out the character isn't usually lost in one giant, spectacular cinematic collapse. It's worn away by tiny permissions.
Give up a little today and you can't get it back. That's his rule of degradation, isn't it?
Yes. We constantly rationalize these micro-compromises. One evaded responsibility. One standard postponed until tomorrow. One compromise that seemed far too trivial to matter in the grand scheme of things. We dress these retreats up in modern language.
Oh, we call it self-care or being realistic or giving ourselves grace.
Exactly. But these small retreats protect our self-respect in the short term while actively degrading our actual underlying reliability. We feel entirely reasonable while we are slowly becoming ungoverned.
But I want to clarify something important here. Willink does draw a crucial distinction between discipline and sheer idiotic stubbornness, right? He's not saying you have to blindly bash your head against a brick wall until you die just to prove you won't quit.
No, the arena does not demand idiocy. Willink explicitly says do not give up based on instinct or emotion. If you have to stand down, make that decision based on cold logic, not the instinct of surrender.
Mature endurance requires knowing the difference between a strategic revision and a cowardly surrender. It's knowing the difference between resting so you have the resources to fight tomorrow and retreating forever because you're scared.
That's spot on.
So McRaven and Willink teach us how to govern ourselves as individuals. They teach us how to build daily armor, how to interpret pain narratively, how to refuse to negotiate with our own weakness. But personal discipline is only one layer of the arena.
It is.
It's one thing to suffer the consequences of your own actions when it's just you. If I fail, I get hurt. But what happens when you step into an arena where your choices fall heavily on other people? When the burden isn't just personal, but widely distributed?
This is where the concept of the arena scales up into its most complex modern form. And to explore this dynamic, we bring in Ben Horowitz, a deeply experienced technology founder, CEO, and investor. He writes extensively about the arena of modern institutional leadership.
Here's where it gets really interesting, because everything we've talked about so far is pretty solitary. But Horowitz shatters the glossy magazine view of leadership. We usually think of leadership as elevation. You get the corner office, you get a bigger paycheck. Everyone claps for your visionary ideas.
But in Horowitz's account, leadership is exposure with consequences attached. He has this blunt, terrifying quote, "Look, this is the terror of being a founder and CEO. It is all your fault."
It is an intentional overstatement designed to reveal a profound structural truth. As a leader, you might not be the direct, literal cause of every single problem in the organization, but you become the terminal point for unresolved consequences. the buck stops with you.
Every delayed decision by a middle manager, every cultural failure, every bad hire, every toxic incentive plan, it eventually mutates and lands directly on your desk.
Which means the leader fundamentally loses the luxury of innocence.
Exactly. The spectator, the critic in the stands we talked about earlier, gets to imagine clean alternatives. The critic says, you should have done plan A, and it would have been perfect and no one would have been hurt. But the leader is operating in abrasive reality, which means they must constantly choose among damaged options.
Action under real conditions contaminates purity. If you choose option A, you ruin company morale. If you choose option B, you lose market share to a competitor. If you choose option C, you have to fire 20 people.
You're constantly choosing the least disastrous path, and you have to wear the blame for the damage that inevitably occurs regardless of what you pick.
That structural reality brings up Horowitz's view on indecision. Because when faced with damaged options, the natural human instinct is to freeze. Horowitz argues that often any decision, even the wrong decision, is better than no decision. Waiting for absolute certainty while the team bleeds is just a polite form of cowardice.
It's cowardice masquerading as thoughtfulness. Leaders will demand one more meeting, one more data projection, one more round of consensus building with the board. It looks like they're being careful and analytical, but often they are just trying to protect themselves.
They want the data to make the decision for them so they don't have to take the personal blame if it goes wrong.
But real life doesn't provide 100% certainty. The leader's core value is accepting the burden of movement even when movement is terrifying and the data is incomplete.
And moving is incredibly costly because it's public. Everyone watches the leader. And Horowitz points out a brilliant paradox. If everyone agrees with the decision, the leader hasn't actually added any unique value. The real leadership happens when you do the thing people actively disagree with.
That is the profound moral loneliness of leadership.
Yeah.
You are acting at the exact point where consensus breaks down. You are stepping into a space where there is no easy affirmation from the crowd. The critic gets the comfort of clean language and agreement. The leader gets the burden of imperfect timing and isolation.
Which leads to what I think is Horowitz's most visceral, difficult mandate.
The best leaders always run towards the darkness.
The darkness is the place where the institution is weakest. It's where the truth is least welcome. It's the failing product line that everyone pretends is fine. The toxic, high-performing executive everyone is afraid to confront. The cultural rot that everyone walks past.
A weak leader circles the darkness. They rename it, they delegate it to a committee, they hire a consultant to look at it, they hope time will magically fix it. The strong leader moves directly toward the place the organization least wants to look.
Right.
I think of it exactly like a physical wound, an infection on an arm. The weak leader just slaps a large bandage over it. It looks fine on the outside, there's no blood visible, so everyone in the room pretends the patient is okay. But underneath, the infection is spreading, rotting the tissue, and eventually it'll kill the patient.
It's a brutal reality. The strong leader is the surgeon. They run toward the darkness. They rip the bandage off. They cut into the flesh. They clean out the infection. It is deeply painful. It is bloody. There is screaming involved, but it's the absolute only way to save the patient.
That analogy perfectly captures the mechanics of it. Leadership is about bearing contamination. You have to absorb the immediate conflict, the anger, and the misreading of your intentions in order to keep reality from becoming too expensive to name later. You have to tell the truth.
But Horowitz is very careful to clarify that telling the truth is a correction, not a cruelty.
Right, you don't do it to be a jerk or to exert power. You do it to keep the system tethered to reality. But correction has intense immediate costs. Human beings hate having their consoling fictions interrupted.
Oh, they despise it.
They hate being told the strategy they worked on for 6 months is failing or that their performance is weak. The leader has to physically and emotionally absorb the immediate cost of honesty, the anger, the tears, the defensiveness, in order to prevent a massive, fatal institutional collapse down the line.
Which leads us directly to what might be the most vulgar, but undeniably the most useful, rule in this entire deep dive. When dealing with this kind of organizational pain, Horowitz says, if you're going to eat shit, don't nibble.
The vulgarity is exact, and it is entirely necessary. There are certain forms of institutional pain. Massive layoffs, deep restructurings, admitting public failures, firing beloved people that simply hurt. You cannot moralize them away. You cannot communicate them pleasantly.
The weak leader tries to distribute that pain slowly to spare their own feelings. They do a 5% layoff this month, a 5% layoff next month. They kill the company's trust by increments.
The strong leader faces the necessity fully, all at once. They
Yeah.
consume the pain entirely so that the people under them do not have to suffer an extended, agonizing version of the leader's own refusal to face reality.
It all comes down to culture. And Horowitz defines culture not as the ping pong tables or the mission statement on the wall. Culture is what people do when you aren't looking. It's institutional character. A leader who just takes punches is impressive, sure. But a leader who builds a culture where the standards remain even when they aren't in the room, that's durable. And it comes down to his ultimate definition of a successful CEO. He talks to the greatest leaders, asks them how they survived the darkness, and they all essentially say the same thing: I didn't quit.
It seems almost absurdly simple, but it is profound. Institutional leadership is often less about brilliant, disruptive strategy than it is about continued, agonizing presence at the point where brilliance repeatedly fails.
You keep returning to consequence. You remain visible, implicated, and responsible long after the glamour of the title has completely worn off.
Exactly.
So if you've done all this, let's say you have successfully ignored the critic in the stands. You have pushed past your own internal despair and refused conformity like Rollo May talked about. You've maintained the daily discipline and expected unfairness like McRaven and Willink. And you've carried the lonely, distributed burden of leadership into the darkness like Horowitz. Have you won the arena? Is that it? Do you get to retire from the mud?
No. Because there is a final, mature question we have to answer. And for this, we bring in Jim Collins. Collins has spent his entire career studying disciplined greatness, long institutional endurance, and what separates the merely good from the truly great. He prevents us from collapsing this entire subject into just a romanticized vision of a single heroic cinematic moment.
Because honestly, it's relatively easy to be brave once, right?
That is the critical vulnerability. Collins poses the final tribunal. He argues that greatness is not occasional courage, it is governed continuity. Listen to his core assertion regarding this. Greatness is not a function of circumstance. Greatness, it turns out, is largely a matter of conscious choice and discipline.
And this raises an important question, doesn't it?
This raises an important question. Are we confusing emotional intensity with actual seriousness?
Oh, that is such a trap. I see this all the time.
Dramatic effort has incredible seductions. A person can enter the arena once they start the bold company, they give the brave, controversial speech, they fight the dramatic battle, and then they spend the rest of their lives living off the myth of that singular bravery.
They identify completely with the image of themselves under fire, but they gradually cease submitting themselves to fresh standards.
They become a caricature of themselves. The arena just becomes a form of theater. They aren't actually striving or risking anything anymore. They're just playing the character of the man in the arena based on something difficult they did 10 years ago.
They mistake their emotional intensity for seriousness. Intensity surges. It burns incredibly hot. It needs applause. It needs a dramatic scene. It needs a villain.
Seriousness is much slower. Seriousness is choosing duty over your mood tomorrow and the next day and the day after that. Seriousness remains structured when the dramatic scene is over, when no one is watching and no one is clapping.
I think about it this way. A dramatic life attracts a lot of admiration, but a governed life deserves trust. You might deeply admire the guy who runs into a burning building once. It makes a great story.
Right.
But you trust the person who shows up every single day for 20 years to build the firehouse, train the rookies, balance the budget, maintain the equipment, and ensure the community is safe long term. Drama is highly photogenic. Greatness is repetitive and often boring.
That is the core of Collins's distinction. Seriousness is not finally measured by your internal emotional intensity or how hard your heart was beating. It is measured by what you can build, preserve, and transmit to others over time.
He famously says, "Great vision without great people is irrelevant." It's a vital correction because the rhetoric of the arena can become very selfish and ego-driven.
It can flatter the lonely, misunderstood struggler. But the mature question isn't just did you dare? It is what forms of excellence and truthfulness continued in the world because you dared.
A founder who has a brilliant idea but can't build a functional team is just energetic. A parent who only steps up and acts heroically during a massive family crisis but is totally absent in the daily, boring routines of life might feel noble, but they aren't providing governed continuity. You have to outlast the isolated event that made you interesting.
Which means Collins actually matures Theodore Roosevelt's original vision. The ultimate man in the arena isn't the one who steps in for one glorious, bloody, defining battle and then retires.
It's the person whose entire life becomes organized around accepting the terms of the arena repeatedly, long after the adrenaline and the emotional electricity have faded into routine.
They continue after failure. They remain incredibly teachable. They allow duty to govern their conduct through decades of time.
Okay, let's pull all of this together. We have gone on a massive, demanding journey today through some of the most rigorous thinking on what it actually means to live a life of consequence.
We started with Roosevelt, who gave us the foundational image of dignity. He drew the indelible line between the critic who lives beside consequence, entirely insulated in retrospective superiority, and the doer who lives under consequence, marred by the dust and sweat of reality.
Then Rollo May showed us the profound inward cost. He taught us that courage isn't the absence of despair, but moving ahead in spite of it. He warned us that conformity is the real enemy of courage, and that the arena is terrifying mostly because it reveals our true, unfinished, limited selves.
Next, McRaven and Willink provided the daily architecture of endurance. They showed us that reliable courage is built through quiet, automated standards, that weakness always enters as a negotiation, and that discipline completely removes the bargaining.
They taught us to expect unfairness and to interpret pain narratively, not as a reason to surrender, but as information to move forward.
Then Ben Horowitz brought us into the modern arena of distributed burden, leadership, where indecision is cowardice, where you have to run toward the darkness like a surgeon, eat the pain without nibbling, and accept that to lead is to fundamentally lose the luxury of innocence.
And finally, Jim Collins asked the adult question, can you sustain it? He showed us that greatness is a governed life, not a series of intense, dramatic episodes. True greatness is fidelity and seriousness over time.
It really is.
So what does this all mean for you, the person listening to this right now? Your arena might not be a literal battlefield, and it might not be the boardroom of a Fortune 500 company. Your arena might be raising a child with special needs.
It might be trying to get a small local business off the ground when the economy is completely against you.
It might be making art that you know your peers might mock. It might be stepping up to fix a broken community project that everyone else has abandoned. Whatever it is, the arena demands the marred face.
If you are experiencing the dust, the sweat, the blood, the crushing fatigue, the unfairness, the despair that Rollo May talked about, that does not mean you are doing it wrong.
It doesn't mean the universe is sending you a sign to quit. Those are the exact signs that you are doing it right. They are the signs that you have refused to withdraw into immaculate distance. You have chosen the burden. And burden, freely accepted, is where your dignity lives.
I want to leave you with a final, perhaps deeply uncomfortable thought to mull over. We've talked extensively about the mechanics of the arena, but I want you to look closely at the architecture of your own life right now.
Think about your daily routines, your career trajectory, the social circles you inhabit, the arguments you choose to engage in, and the ones you avoid.
Ask yourself this: are you truly building a stable, disciplined life of governed greatness? Or have you masterfully, quietly constructed a perfect arrangement designed solely to ensure that genuine, terrifying stakes never actually arrive at your doorstep? Are you actually managing your life, or are you just managing your distance from the arena?
Remember that pristine architectural model we talked about at the very beginning? The one that looks perfect behind glass in the studio, but has never actually been tested by the wind or the rain or the messy reality of the mud.
You can live your whole life as a model. You can stay clean. You can stay theoretical.
You can stay in the stands and use your retrospective superiority to critique the people in the dirt. But the model is never a home. It's just an idea. It is time to step onto the construction site. It is time to get muddy. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. We'll leave you to ponder your next step.